Hello. Welcome back to Better or Worse, the series where we go through all of the new updated exotics to see if they're in fact good or still bad. This time around we have like 23 items or something I didn't actually count. Mainly due to the fact that I'm covering the exotic armor updated this season as well as the exotic weapons. It was 30 by the way, I recounted. Anyway, as always, timestamps in the description. We're going to go Hunter armor first, and then Titan armor, then Warlock armor, and then the weapons. I've avoided surges at all costs, though that's quite hard to do because it's harder to avoid surges than to actually get them. But yeah, let's go. Last up on our list is Sealed Ahamkara Grasps. It's got the change, and I quote, will now reload the magazine of all of your weapons when you defeat a target with a powered melee, and for 5 seconds after dealing melee damage, you gain increased movement speed and jump height. Okay, this exotic is The change itself is decent. The movement speed is unfortunately unnoticeable, which is really sad, but let's be honest, it probably wasn't going to do anything anyway. And then the reload all of your weapon thing, I think it's just quite a nice quality of life improvement in my opinion. But the thing with this exotic is it's still bad, and it's not bad because its effects are executed poorly. It's bad because the effects themselves are useless in the current sandbox. Like, the only time reload your weapon on melee hit would ever be genuinely useful is on a close range burst damage weapon, aka a rapid fire shotgun, and that is it. I genuinely couldn't think of using it on anything else. Like, every other use I can think of can just be pretty easily done with a mod. Reloading weapons in general can just, you know, reload mod. That works. Or what about, I don't know, quickly reloading a weapon and switching off of it? Oh, what is this? A holster mod? Oh my god. Yeah, this exotic it's not going to be good ever. At least if it sticks to its current plan of just purely reloading. It needs something else other than reloading to make it good. Some of my ideas, potentially overflowing the magazine instead of reloading, or instead maybe like a trench barrel for all weapons. 2 seconds after meleeing an enemy you get like a 30% damage boost. That would obviously have to be balanced because that's quite a lot. But still, yeah, this is in fact not better. It is in fact worse. Roll credits. Anyway, moving on. Next up is Oathkeeper. This got the change gaining bonus to the bow's damage when released based on how long the bow charge was held. Essentially, when you fully draw back a bow, you get a little bar in the corner which slowly rises up, and then at max it will give you a 150% damage buff, which is really goddamn strong. Unfortunately though, keep in mind it doesn't affect Leviathan's Breath, which is quite sad, but still every other bow in the game, 150% damage buff. There is one slight problem though, and it's the fact that it takes about 2 seconds to fully charge up, and in that 2 seconds you can shoot more than 3 arrows, meaning you can just do more DPS by just normally shooting, which is quite a deal breaker if you ask me. Of course, you can just let it charge a tiny amount and then shoot it, so you still get a damage boost that it's not 150%, but you know, it's still there. But still, honestly, that alone, I just don't see this gauntlets being too worth it, especially because it is only primary weapons. If you could use this with Leviathan's Breath and only granted like a 50%, but still you could use it, I mean, this would be great, but because it's only primary weapons, they're not exactly damage dealers. But yeah, that's about it. Moving on. Alright, next on the list is Raiju's Harness. My fan is on, by the way, you might hear it. It's currently 28 degrees outside, and I don't really want to boil alive today. Anyway, the change they did to this is a lot. Firstly, when you deactivate your arc super, you get a blinding explosion around you that temporarily increases your arc weapon damage. On top of that, the super energy refunded upon deactivation has been increased. However, blocking with Worldline Guard will no longer consume less energy, and also the passive passive super drain has been reduced from 50% to 30%. First and foremost, didn't know the passive super drain was actually intended. I didn't think anyone did, so I guess that's cool then. And also, blocking with Worldline Guard, who cares? Like, seriously, I don't think anyone really minds that one. But anyway, the main effect itself, the blinding explosion. The explosion itself, it's not the best. It doesn't do any damage, and the blinding effect itself doesn't last that long, but you know, it's still something. On the other hand, the weapon damage boost is pretty nutty. It gives you a 4 arc weapon damage boost, aka 4 surge mods, for 20 seconds. That is a really long time. On top of that, considering you can deactivate the super immediately, it actually makes it viable for damage, which is something that you don't see a lot. Also, just to make this even better, the super refund is kind of stupid. If you deactivate immediately, you get back 75% of your super. Granted, you don't do anything with the super, but still, you proc the effects of the chest piece, like the blinding explosion, and you get back 75%. That's kind of insane. It does decrease quite harshly. If you do a 1-2 punch thing with a handshake, you only get about 50%, so it's not insane for PvP, which is good, because I don't want another Chaos Reach. But But, you know, still, this exotic is just so goddamn cool. It essentially turns your super into an ability. That ability being a kind of mid-blinding effect, but it's still, you know, cool. I'd really like to see this expanded on more. Mainly just the effect itself becoming stronger. Maybe doing damage, maybe having bigger radius. I don't know, it's just stronger anyway. But still, this one's really fun to play around with. Anyway, moving on. Next up is Radiant Dance Machines, and these ones are pretty interesting. Basically, now the free dodge effect can be extended by getting kills, as well as it no longer deactivates when you leave the AoE of an enemy. And honestly, this is one of the strongest reworks we have ever got. The ability to get potentially infinite reloads for a potential infinite amount of time, or potentially infinite melees for a potential infinite amount of time. Well, I can't really explain why that's powerful, but that's very powerful. And I mainly tested this with the infinite melee side, because I think that's just more interesting. I didn't screw around with the infinite reloads, so I can see the potential in it. But yeah, the infinite melees, they're cool. I used every single subclass, and by far the best by genuine miles is Arc. With Lethal Current, every time you dodge, you can jolt a target as well as explode them, and then do other effects I can't remember. And then you can do that every single time you dodge. I mean, you can do that with Radiant Dance Machines every single time you dodge, and you can just constantly explode enemies, and it does quite a lot of damage, and it has quite a bit of ad clear. On top of that, with Radiant Dance Machines and Arc, when you're amplified and you have flow stay on, 97% damage resist when you dodge. You can basically be immortal while dodging forever. And since it no longer deactivates when you leave the AoE of an enemy, you can kind of just dodge from group of enemies to group of enemies without taking any damage, and then beat the shit out of them. I mean, yeah, it's just really fucking good. There's also quite a bit of potential for Smoke Bomb, because Smoke Bomb can actually blind targets as well as potentially give you basically infinite invisibility. The thing is with Smoke Bomb though, it says basically no offense, it's pure defense, so, you know, it doesn't work solo, but it's still there. Anyway, if you're a hunter, please give this thing a go. It is insanely fun now. I have literally no feedback for these things. I think they're in just a perfect spot. Anyway, moving on. Next up is Mask of Bakris. Basically, all they did to this thing is they changed the weapon damage buff it gives you to now a 4x weapon empowerment for both Arc and Stasis. That's the same as Surge Mods, by the way. And yeah, honestly, I mean, it's pretty cool. It's also kind of exactly as you'd expect. It's a 4x damage boost, 25%. That's kind of all it does. There's no gimmick, there's nothing. It gives you a damage boost to your weapons. That's it. It's not the worst effect in the world. It's not the best effect in the world. Weapon damage isn't amazing, especially if you go into high-end content, you'll find that out very quickly with a primary weapon, but still, this makes it pretty easy to get damage boosts, I suppose. I'd say the biggest problem with this thing right now is the fact that it's on stasis, and can only be used on stasis. And stasis is really bad. But other than that, the exotic itself is perfectly fine. Not incredibly powerful, not incredibly weak. But yeah, moving on. Next up, we're moving on to Titans with Point Contact Cannon Brace. The first change to this thing is that lightning strikes now jolt targets. No internal cooldown. Every single target you hit is jolted. On top of that, the damage of the lightning bolts has been quadrupled from 50 to 200. That's And then on top of that, being amplified, instead of increasing the range, now increases the damage by 50%, meaning you could do 300 damage per lightning bolt, which also jolts targets. 300 damage, by the way, is about half of an ignition, because an ignition at base does 750. So you're doing half an ignition to everything around you, as well as jolting. As you can expect, that's pretty decent. Pretty decent is an understatement. That's pretty fucking amazing. Considering as well, you don't even need to hit anything with the Thunderclap to actually proc the lightning bolts. It just procs anyway. And yeah, the ad clear now with Thunderclap is just insane. It's genuinely brutal. And then especially the jolt. I can't get over that. Jolting every single target around you is no understatement. That's not only single target, but it's also huge ad clear. Like, just overall, this exotic is actually finally a good exotic. It's actually viable. However, there are still definitely some issues. Firstly, the melee regen really isn't that good, and I think that mainly comes from the fact that the lightning strikes themselves don't count as melee damage, meaning half of the kills you get per Thunderclap won't give you back any energy at all, which is obviously not very good. On top of that, the survivability of this thing, man, ooh, goddamn. The only thing you actually have to heal is knockout, and knockout only starts health regen when you get a melee kill. It doesn't give you any health. It literally just starts your health regen. And whilst in PvP that might be pretty goddamn good, in PvE it's basically useless, because as soon as you get hit by one bit of damage, whether that's just AoE or DOT damage, it completely stops the healing and you're out of health and you're probably dying. And that happens all of the time, like 100% of the time. Though still, even with those two issues, this is obviously an incredibly strong exotic now. Well, at least it's decent. I'd 100% probably use it in legend content. In master content, maybe, don't know about it though. And then in grandmaster, probably definitely not. But still, still, overall, this is definitely an exotic if you want to use Thunderclap. But yeah, moving on. Next up is no backup plans, and they have completely reworked the effect. Firstly, the gauntlets grant a passive increase to your shotgun airborne effectiveness and reload speed, and it is very much noticeable. Also, getting 2 red bar kills or 1 yellow bar kill with a shotgun will grant you a full void overshield. And then on top of that, while you have a void overshield, getting 1 shotgun kill will completely refresh the entire overshield health and duration, and you'll also get a 35% empowerment to shotguns, which is pretty goddamn good, not gonna lie. However, 2 major flaws in this exotic. Flaw number 1, void overshield. Void overshield might seem good, but you'd be surprised about how genuinely weak it is. In anything above hero, it disappears instantly because it only has 45 HP at max. And sure, it does have a 50% damage resist while it's up, but again, 45 HP doesn't last that long, which is seriously a bad thing, because when the void overshield disappears, not only does your shotgun damage buff completely vanish, but also the 50% damage resist completely vanishes, and anything else that you have built into void overshield using has completely vanished. Just alone, it's not good enough to be a survivability thing, and it's also just not strong enough to be, you know, a buff damage thing. And then also, the second major flaw of this exotic, which isn't even to do with the exotic, it's to do with shotguns. Shotguns suck ass. I think it's pretty clear this exotic wants you to run and gun with shotguns. You go straight in, you beat the shit out of everything, you come out with full HP. However, it just doesn't work almost at all because shotguns are so bad at ad clear. They are purely single target, they don't really do that much damage in the first place unless you're using a slug shotgun, and then on top of that, their ammo economy is not even close to being good enough to support an ad clear role. Shotguns were just never designed for this playstyle in mind, so they're obviously just not going to work with these gauntlets. Even with conditional finality, which is the best ad clear shotgun in the game, and it still just doesn't work. Granted, it is a lot better than normal shotgun, but it's still hard to get multi-kills with it and keep yourself alive, and then also, again, it suffers from ammo economy issues. It just doesn't support it. So in general, I think these gauntlets still need quite a lot of help. The buff needs to firstly not rely on a void overshield. I think it should just be a 10-second buff that doesn't go away at all. On top of that, it needs more survivability, like maybe that mentioned buff could give you a bit of damage resistance, 25%. That way you have a constant 25% damage resist instead of only a 50% damage resist while void overshield is active. And then also, obviously this isn't to do with the exotic, but shotguns in general need to be better at ad clear. As I said, in their current state, they're just not strong enough to support the role. And then only then, with these effects applied, would this exotic generally become pretty good. As for right now, the only thing I can really see it being good for is for DPS, because again, a 35% empowerment is really good. But other than that, it's mid as hell. Moving on. Next up is Second Chance. This is one I'm quite pissed off about. Basically, now Shield Throw also weakens targets on hit, and if you stun a barrier champion with your Shield Throw melee, you get a single full charge back. Also, they buffed Shield Throw a little bit, but not that much. And yeah, I think my first note actually wraps it up quite nicely. Genuinely sucks. Honestly, this exotic and this buff does absolutely nothing to this melee. And again, the buff has done absolutely nothing to the exotic. Weakening is an effect that is so common. It is one of the easiest effects to apply in-game. And whilst this is a good way to apply it, it's not exceptional in any way. And on top of that, regenning your shield on stunning a barrier champion. Oh my god, that affects 1, maybe 2% of your entire gameplay was this thing. Honestly, I feel like this buff in general, it was just to satisfy like the fantasy of anti-champion ability. Because now, oh my god, look at that, you can shield throw a barrier champion and they stun and then they get weakened as well. You know what also does that? Obelisk. You know what also does that? Every anti-barrier thing in the game. You know what also does that? A grenade, snare bomb, Heartshadow, anything. Oh my god. Yeah, also, can we talk about the fucking melee? Shield throw is such an awful melee. It sucks. It's slow as hell. Its damage is awful, and its tracking is some of the worst in the world. You could throw this into a group of 17 ads and it still managed to hit the fucking floor. God, it just pisses me off, man. I really want to use this thing. But god, it is so bad. For it to be good, it needs so much help. Firstly, shield throw. Please buff Shield for Man, just as a base melee. It is not fair that hunters have a melee that could wipe an entire room, literally, and yet you have this, which can't even hit 3 enemies most of the time. But don't worry, it gives you Void Overshield. Wow. 15 HP per hit, by the way, not even a full Void Overshield. So yeah, that melee needs to be buffed. Also, the exotic itself needs to be so much better. It needs to have something that isn't in tune with the fantasy of anti-champion ability. Especially, it needs a way to regen shields so badly, which isn't only active 1 or 2% of the time. Something like killing weakened targets grants shield energy. Being near a volatile explosion grants shield energy. I don't know, but you know, like something like that. Something that's actually practical. Because right now, it's just this is probably one of the worst exotics in the game. Yeah, that's it for this exotic. That was more like a rant than actually talk about the exotic, but you know, whatever. Moving on. Next up is Stronghold. Firstly, they've replaced the healing when you block shots precisely with a 50% damage reduction while blocking. On top of that, when you stop blocking, you gain restoration ×2 with a duration that increases based on the number of shots you blocked. Now, firstly, the damage resist is pretty goddamn nice. Keep in mind, this is stacking with the maximized guard stacks this exotic already gives you, so you already have an insane amount of damage resist. You put this on top and you don't take damage to some enemies. Literally don't take damage to some enemies, which is always pretty goddamn fun to see. Also, the restoration ×2. This is actually currently bugged. Instead of giving you it when you stop blocking, it just gives you restoration ×2 whenever you hit anything with a sword, which is definitely more powerful maybe than its current effect, but even so, I still feel like it would still be powerful even after it gets patched, so you know, that's what it is. Anyway, just the restoration ×2 effect on its own, it's goddamn nice. Being able to heal whilst attacking something can be that can be game changing completely, and it's actually single-handedly the reason why I feel this is better than old Stronghold, because the old Stronghold's instant healing effect could be very, very strong, but it was only during some scenarios. With this, you can just, you know, get constant restoration ×2, and that can literally save your life while trying to fight something, because, well, restoration ×2 is very, very strong. Anyway, though, this exotic overall is stupidly goddamn good. I feel like it just fixes every problem with a sword, which is, firstly, getting towards target, you got the damage resist now, and then healing while fighting the target, you got restoration ×2, boom, you're fixed. You can literally just go ham with any sword you want until you run out of ammo, so overall, this is just a super sick exotic. And again, even when it gets patched, I still feel it's just gonna be as powerful as it currently is. In fact, maybe even more powerful, because you'll be able to go into some heights with maybe 12 seconds of restoration ×2, which, well, that's pretty insane. But yeah, if you're a Titan out there, go grab your Lament and just go have fun with this thing. It's super awesome. Anyway, moving on. Next up is Khepri's Horn, and all they've done is they've added Scorch to the wave. It applies 50 Scorch stacks, it can only hit once, and that's literally it. As you can hopefully expect, this buff has done very little for this exotic. Yes, it can help ignite targets. 50 Scorch stacks is quite a lot. And yes, it can prop Ember of Sight, I don't know how to say it, but that fragment is incredibly helpful for the specific exotic because increased class ability regen. But other than that, it's kind of the exact same exotic. Still though, there are quite a lot of things that I did notice while using it, which I just think really need to be improved. Firstly, the solar wave doesn't always count as an ability, meaning it doesn't always proc Roaring Flames. Also, it won't go through shields, so if you have a bunch of shields in the same spot, you can't, you know, pierce them. On top of that, it also doesn't drop down to lower heights when placed up high, and it also doesn't track, which is a real big pain in the ass because it's so easy to miss this thing. Yes, I know it does come back to you, but I think it tracking instead of coming back to you would be a much better ability. And then finally, just in general, the wave is weak, it should deal a bit more damage, and I think it should also just go further. But yeah, other than that, it's the same exotic it was before, essentially. With all of those things combined, I think this exotic would be in the mid category. I don't think it'd be too good. But as it currently is now, it's definitely a very bad exotic. Anyway, moving on. Alright, next up on our list is Eternal Warrior and Path of Burning Steps. I'm covering both at the same time since they literally do the exact same thing now. Anyway, the way they work is getting arc or solar kills will grant you a chance to get weapon empowerment for 10 seconds. You can then proc the effect again to reset the duration and get another stack of weapon empowerment up to a maximum of 4 stacks. You can also instantly get the max stacks of weapon empowerment by just doing a specific action. However, in my opinion, these actions are way too specific and impractical, so I'm not really going to take them into consideration. Anyway, unfortunately, these exotics are incredibly mid. Getting the effect up, stacking it to max stacks, can be a real pain in the ass sometimes. It takes between 1 and 3 kills just to get a stack, and getting 3 kills in legend content can be a little bit demanding, not gonna lie. On top of that, even if you manage to get the max stack, stacks, I mean, it's only a 25% empowerment. And this is the same as Surge mods, and considering Surge mods can grant you a 22% empowerment, well, you can basically replace the entire effect on this exotic with 3 Surge mods, which would be fine if this was like a bonus effect on the exotics, but unfortunately, for both of these exotics, this is the major effect, which just basically makes them completely irrelevant. For these things to be good, both of these exotics, they firstly need a much easier way to get the stack up, and that could literally just be as simple as it resets the duration on any kill, not just kills that, you know, give you the stack. And then on top of that, and I guess a bit more importantly, it needs an effect that isn't replaceable with 3 mods. Something like getting arc multi-kills creates a jolting lightning strike, or even potentially solar multi-kills grant you cure or restoration, something along those lines. Again, something that isn't replaceable with 3 surge mods. I think with both of these buffs, these exotics would be pretty nice. They'd be like general play exotics. They obviously wouldn't be insanely good for like Grandmasters or anything like that, but they still do pretty well in Legend, and they'd just be a little bit of fun to use. But again, in their current state, they are god awful. Please don't use them. Anyway, moving on. Next up is Vesper of Radius, and this exotic is a little busted right about now, actually. Firstly, Rifts release additional shockwaves now. They release 1 every 5 seconds after the first for 3 in total. On top of that, if a shockwave ends up killing an enemy, they explode in Arc Explosion. And then, the bit that legitimately makes this chess piece meta, while an Arc subclass is equipped, these shockwaves and subsequent ignitions blind nearby targets. That is, a little fucking busted, yeah. With this exotic, you can legitimately, and I'm not joking about this, walk straight into a group of adds, place 1 rift, and then win the fight. Not only do they take damage, but if any enemy survives, they also get blinded for an insane amount of time, and then on top of that, even if their blind ends up running out, the rift they release multiple shockwaves now, so they remain blinded, and then, as a little cherry on top, if anything manages to actually die from the shockwave instead of to you, they end up exploding and blinding more targets, and also dealing more damage. Legitimately, like, keep in mind as well, you're in a healing rift, 40 HP a second, that's pretty insane, that's better than restoration times 1. And also, you're on Arc, you got an Arc Soul, like, those are actually pretty deadly, you'd be surprised. Legitimately, this exotic is so powerful. I've had so much fun using it. The gameplay you're currently seeing, by the way, is Master. Minus 20 levels under their level. And it is destroying them. It is so powerful. Honest to God, I have no real complaints about this exotic. I think it's perfect. This is seriously like one of the best changes they've ever done. But yeah, this thing is fucking awesome. Please use it. Moving on. Next up is Chromatic Fire. What they've done to this is they've increased the radius and damage of the explosion, and on top of that, it also applies a status effect depending on which subclass you're on. If you're on Solar, it will Scorch. If you're on Stasis, Slow, Strand Sever, Void Weaken, and Arc Blind. Now, I want to start off by saying the theming of this exotic, or change even, is super goddamn cool. Like, I love the whole idea of something changing depending on which subclass you're on. I think it's just sick. However, in terms of how much this change has actually improved the exotic, I would not say it's done a lot. Again, while the theming is awesome, the status effects themselves are actually pretty goddamn irrelevant. Sever is basically god useless, Slow isn't that practical at all, Scorch is at least a little decent, I suppose. Weaken is good as well, however, considering you're going to be applying it to, you know, add clear enemies 95% of the time, which will probably just die anyway to one shot, you know, it's not that relevant. And then you have Arc, which is incredibly relevant. Blinding is an incredibly powerful debuff. The only reason it's not used that often is because it's a pain in the ass to apply. So when you put it on something that is incredibly easier to apply, cough cough, Vesper of Radius, cough cough, it suddenly becomes incredibly good. So yeah, unless you're using this with Arc, I really wouldn't recommend using this chess piece because I just don't think it's that strong. Again, theming wise it's awesome, but execution wise it's just not the best. But yeah, moving on. Next up is Sanguine Alchemy. This got the change while standing in any rift, gain a bonus to weapons. That's it, with a damage type matching your subclass damage type. It means weapon damage, by the way, it's written wrong, and it gives you 2 stacks of surge mods to any weapon that matches your subclass damage type. Yes, this is the same as surge mods. Please keep that in mind. I've heard a lot of people are getting that confused or something, which is a bit stupid. But yeah, as you can expect, it hasn't changed at all. It's kind of just the exact same exotic, but you get a damage buff now. Yay. Other than just using it for the sake of using it, I've only seen one genuine reason to use this exotic, which is during damage phase. If you're using 2 different weapons, you can get different surges for like 2 different weapons. It's min-maxing shit. But other than that, there's not really a use for this at all. It's still kind of just a useless exotic. Some things that would make it maybe a not useless exotic though. Firstly, making the rifts bigger. I don't think that's possible, but I would love for that to be a thing. Secondly, it should at base just extend the duration of a rift. I think that's just relevant enough to the exotic to be in effect. And also, I think the most relevant thing, any kill should be able to give you blood magic. Abilities are so powerful now. Having it only be gotten from weapon kills is just a little unfair. But yeah, other than that, this is the same exotic. Moving on. Next up is Claws of Ahamkara. And all they've done to this is they just added an intrinsic heavy-handed mod. And it's kind of neat, I guess. It kind of just saves 1 mod slot on your gauntlets. You are most likely going to be using heavy-handed anyway if you're using Claws of Ahamkara, so just having it intrinsically in the gauntlets is just quite nice. But in terms of overall power increase, it's not gone up that much. Still though, I really do like this way of buffing exotics, and I think it should be done to more exotics. In fact, I am actually pretty sure this is Bungie's test. This is their way of seeing if this works. So they will probably implement this to other exotics, especially all the exotics that just give you a second charge of things. But yeah, it's not that much more powerful now, but it is neat. Moving on. Next up is Mantle of Battle Harmony, and all they've done to this thing is they changed the damage buff it provides to a 4 times weapon empowerment. They've also extended the base duration to 10 seconds in PvE and 5 seconds in PvP. Now overall, it's kind of a buff. The damage buff has went from 20 to 25%, which is neat, and the base duration extending is just nice quality of life stuff. But yeah, overall, don't really know what to say. Same category as like Mask of Bakris. It's a 25% damage buff, doesn't really do much more than that. Though I will say though, if you were using this thing to damage stack, as in build into your weapons, you can't do that anymore because the damage buff it provides is in the same category as surge mods, so you can no longer use this and build into surge mods simultaneously. But other than that, you know, it's just an all-around buff. But that's kind of it. Moving on. Alright, next up is Starfire Protocol, and this has got its energy gained per instance of damage reduced from 20% to 2.5. However, empowered weapon kills will now grant you 20% grenade energy. Now, firstly, the ad clear of this thing is actually still on par. Granted, you now actually have to build into grenades, which is reasonable, let's be honest. But still, as long as you do that, it is generally still on par as it was before for ad clear. For single target against champions though, and for single target against bosses, well, that is quite a different story. For champions, you can always guarantee you will have at least 1 grenade, but basically nothing more than that. And then for bosses, well, it's just been completely obliterated. I mean, now you can get 1 extra grenade in a boss fight. Before, you could get like 11 or something. You know, it's insane. But I mean, it's not without reason. This was the strongest exotic in the game. This was the strongest exotic build in the game, so it does make sense. I will, however, say this, and keep in mind, this is coming from someone who bloody hates this thing. I do think the nerf was a bit too harsh. I think having it at 5% would have been at least fair. It would have meant you had a little bit better single target against champions, and then especially against bosses. Having it at 5% would actually make it still a practical option against bosses, since you'd be able to get a grenade every 8 seconds or so, which, you know, that's not that bad. Overall though, I would actually still say this is a decent exotic. I'd take it into Legend, probably not anything above that though. Anyway, moving on. Next up we have Eyes of Tomorrow, which can now refund 1 ammo if you kill 4 targets with a single missile volley. And I think it's pretty understandable to why I would call this a very good ad clear weapon. It's a rocket launcher, it shoots 6 missiles, they can individually track, and then when you kill 4 enemies you get plus 50% damage to the next volley. But most importantly, it's a rocket launcher. Seriously though, this thing is a very, very powerful ad clear gun. I wouldn't say it's the best. Finding 4 enemies to actually kill with a single volley is a little harder than you'd expect. So I think something like Trinity Ghoul would actually probably beat it, at least be on par. But at least for higher end content, this is a very, very good ad clear gun just because it does so much damage per shot. But even with that said, I actually wouldn't say this gun is particularly good. And that's because of 2 things. Firstly, it's a heavy weapon. So you're essentially trading your heavy weapon slot, which is typically used for DPS, for a very, very ad clear focused gun. And keep in mind, Eyes of Tomorrow's DPS is not good at all. So that's a huge trade back. Also, it's an exotic, so you can't even recover from that trade back by using something like Izanagi's or Arbalest. Still though, overall, again, it's a very, very powerful ad clear gun. And most importantly, it's really fucking fun. But yeah, moving on. Next up is Graviton Lance. What they've done is they've increased the fire rate to match Revision Zero 2-round burst mode. Now this change is really goddamn nice. The faster fire rate is kind of like just pure quality of life. It shoots faster, so it feels feels better in general. Also, if you miss shots, you can recover better now, and if you're switching between target to target, it's easy to do that. And then some other minor things like being able to apply like volatile or something quicker than before. But yeah, overall, it's just a super nice change. Though I think on a technical scale, it hasn't like increased the DPS or anything like that significantly. So in a way, it is kind of unchanged. It just feels a lot more different now to actually shoot. My only wish for this thing is if the catalyst wasn't fucking turnabout, that would be great. You have one of the best weapons you've ever designed and they gave it fucking turnabout. But yeah, it's a great gun. Moving on. Next up we have Jade Rabbit, which instead refunds 3 rounds to the magazine instead of 1 when the perk is activated. Now last time I covered Jade Rabbit, I basically just skipped over it. So next up we have, no, I'm just kidding. But I mean, seriously though, it's a PvP gun, obviously. The perk does literally nothing for PvE, almost at all. And I think as my notes summarize up pretty quickly, hey look, now you can do 0 damage and not reload doing it. Yeah, it's obviously not a PvE gun. And while this change does give it theoretical infinite ammo, it's also a primary weapon and it does jack shit damage, so there you have that. But yeah, moving on. Next up we have the Manticore, which is a fun one. What they've done is they've increased the catalyst damage resistance from tier 3 to tier 4. No idea what that means numerically, but they've done it. They've also increased the movement speed while you're flying. And on top of that, if you activate the catalyst perk or deal sustained damage after activating the catalyst perk, you will partially refill the magazine. Now firstly, that damage resist, it actually works. Again, don't know what it is numerically, but it makes you very tanky while you're in the air. If you pair that with an effect like Devour, you will kind of become invincible in a sense, at least in lower end content where you can kill fast enough. But yeah, it seriously works. Also, the movement speed is very noticeable. It seems to be a little bit faster than just walking normally, which just kind of makes it really goddamn fun to move in the air now. Also, the auto reloading perk. It's good, but it's not good enough. On activation either of the ways, you get back 3 ammo, and it has a 0.6 second cooldown, which is pretty harsh. And yeah, as I said, it's really good. Having ammo just go directly back in the gun means you do more damage, means you stay up longer, means you get, like, you know, longer damages. It just helps the gun overall. But the fact that it only returns 3 ammo to the magazine is a little bit pathetic. If that was more, if that was 9 ammo, then I actually see this gun genuinely becoming really good, or at least decently good for like legend content stuff, probably not above that. But yeah, this change is really nice. The only other thing I would like for this gun to have is a faster way to charge the anti-gravity thruster, because currently you just have to sit there and dump like 3 mags into an enemy and it's just boring. If it was faster, now that would be cooler. But yeah, moving on. Next up is Heartshadow, and I genuinely love this one. They've changed it so the damage buff now activates quicker while you're invisible to 0.25 seconds instead of 1 second. Also, any damage you deal will now weaken while the damage buff is active instead of just the projectiles. And what this buff has created is one of the coolest combos I've seen. Okay, it's not really very intense or cool at all, but it is still awesome. Basically, find a champion, go up to them, heavy attack, and then just start light attack spamming. Because of how fast the damage buff activates now, it actually activates even if you just start light attack spamming immediately after heavy attacking, which means you get that damage buff, which is 50% or 40%, I believe. It's something in that line. And then on top of that, now that you have the damage buff, and because any damage now afflicts weaken, you also weaken the target with your light attack spam, which is another 50% damage boost. Alone, that's super fucking good. That's like that's some insane damage stacking, but you could go like so easily higher with this thing. Because you don't need to be on a void subclass to get the weaken effect, you can also be on solar to get radiant, 25% damage buff. Then on top of that, you can pair it with a couple surge mods, 3 in total, 22% damage buff, which in total, I don't know what it leads to, but it leads to some fucking insane damage, especially for solo. Like, just in general, I love this goddamn sword now. It's so cool. The only big problem is the ammo economy. It is horrible. Keep in mind, it takes 4 ammo to heavy attack, and then also you have all the light attacks in there. It can sometimes take like 12, 14 shots just to kill a single champion, which can be pretty expensive, but you know, it's still goddamn decent. And yeah, overall, this buff is awesome. It makes it so fucking cool. I do wish the catalyst was something that was more interesting, because right now it's pretty boring, and it also just doesn't work with the gun at all. The gun, by the way. But yeah, it's super cool. Moving on. Next up is Worldline Zero, and this is in the exact same boat as Heartshadow. The sprinting attack can now be chained into itself once. The energy cost for doing the sprinting attack has been reduced from 100% to 50%, and also the damage per individual sprinting heavy attack has been increased by 8.3%. And yeah, this seems kind of sick. Firstly, chaining into each heavy attack is awesome. That is so cool. It's unfortunate you can't do it in the air, because that would be way too fun. And also, the damage, you can almost one-shot one-shot champions. Granted, I do have arc burn here, but still, god damn. Also keep in mind when using this thing, Assassin's Blade exists, and that is actually a damage buff. That's 20% I think. So you probably could one-shot champions if you actually managed to chain it all together. Yeah, this thing's pretty fun now. Though, I will say that I still think it's missing something. Sure, it can one-shot champions, and that's fun and all, but then you also have Lament, and that can kind of do it, but better. So I don't really know where the identity of this sword lies, but still, it's fun. And if that's all you care about, go ahead and use it. Anyway, moving on. Next up is Sweet Business, which now fires an explosive round every 20 shots or 8 shots when fully spun up. And this one is actually kind of surprising. The damage single target is pretty good, actually, considering that this got the explosive round buff that it got this season, as well as a 25% damage buff from last season. Yeah, it is legitimately quite good. Don't get me wrong, you're not insta-killing champions or anything, but for a primary weapon, its sustained DPS is pretty decent. Though, I will definitely say, the magazine is quite a pain in the ass. You have to reload if you're not using Action Warwick all of the goddamn time. In fact, half of your playtime with this thing is fucking reloading. This used to be fixed by the auto reload perk on the gun, but ever since they just blatantly removed primary ammo bricks, this perk has gotten a lot worse. So this gun, please Bungie, it definitely needs an auto reloading perk, and I actually think the solution is so much more simpler than you'd think. 4 times the charm. Done. Literally, if any of you have used Retrofit Escapade, that comes with 4 times the charm. That is insane. You put that on this thing and it will become such a fun weapon to use. But yeah, for the time being, I would just use this thing with Action Warwick, because on any other character with any other playstyle, it's just a pain in the ass. Anyway, moving on. Next up is Legend of Acrius, which they've increased the total ammo for from 12 to 16, and also increased the maximal projectile distance from 9 meters to 12 meters, like that actually means anything to anyone. But my notes actually sum this up incredibly well. Chonker, more ammo equals more chonk. Legend of Acrius is technically one of the highest DPS guns in the game, at least it was before. I don't know if that still holds up. Regardless, it still does a shit ton of damage, so by just adding more ammo, it just does more damage. I don't really know what to explain to you. Though I will definitely note the champion killing capability of this gun has went up significantly from the ammo boost, but other than that, yeah, it's more ammo. It does more damage now. Awesome. Moving on. Next up is Tommy's Matchbook, which now states while overheated, sustained fire scorches your targets. Every 5 shots applies 14 plus 7 scorch attacks. Please keep in mind, this is a catalyst perk. Despite being written on the actual perk of the gun itself, it is only active when the catalyst is active. Regardless, this is a very strong buff. You can ignite with Ember of Ashes equipped 3 times per magazine. Like, legitimately, it's so fucking powerful. On top of that, considering how easy it is to actually get ignitions, you can build into them, and ignitions have huge build potential because like half of the fragments on solar are to do with ignitions. Honest to god, this primary weapon is so strong now, it's incredible. The only thing I would say, which is a little unfair in my opinion, is you have to have restoration, or at the very least a healing effect, because if you don't, you will die because you're on red health all the time. But other than that, this is such a powerful primary weapon. It is incredible. I actually can't wait to use this in Grandmaster. This is going to be awesome. Anyway, moving on. Next up is Skyburner's Oath, and this got its Scorch stacks increased from 3 to 5 plus 5. Now, this would be in the same boat as Tommy's Matchbook, since they kind of do the same thing now, but unfortunately, the gun itself has a severe case of being complete ass. Like, I'll give credit where credit's due. The increase in Scorch stacks means you can actually ignite, and it's not that hard to do. It does take a bit, so I wouldn't use it for anything like unstop, but you know, it still can ignite, I suppose. But other than that, the entire gun itself is still just kind of complete ass. Hip fire is slow, it feels horrible to use, it does almost 0 damage apart from the ignite, and then the scope down sight. The ADS fire is like, I don't even use it at all. I mean, just in general, it's like Jade Rabbit got a little bit better and they called it Skyburner's Oath, so there you have that. It's a decent gun now because it can ignite and it's not that bad, but you know, overall it's still very, very bad. Moving on. And finally, the last weapon on our list is Salvage's Grip. Salvations, fuck. They've kind of reworked it now so it has 2 different firing modes depending on how much you charge up the gun. If you fully charge it up, it will create a pattern of stasis crystals that literally looks like bowling pins, and if you do absolutely anything below that, it's just a normal grenade launcher shot which does more damage to stasis crystals and frozen targets. On top of that, they've added a new perk which reloads the magazine from reserves when you quickly shatter 3 crystals. Anyway, firstly, the rework itself has made the gun 1,000 times more viable, which for Salvation Grip standards is insane. Literally, this thing generated like 3 stasis crystals before. The fact that I can actually bring it into a nightfall and kill an enemy is incredible. Also, the new auto reload perk is very, very good. It works incredibly well. It's literally active all the time. You will never reload again. However, this thing has still some very, very big problems. Firstly, the damage is pretty goddamn awful. Like, even with the wombo combo of the charge shot on the ground and the normal charge shot, it still doesn't do that much, which is actually really terrible considering how bad its ammo economy is as well. This comes at base with 16 shots, and it's also a heavy weapon. Please keep that in mind. And of course, please also keep in mind that it basically takes 2 shots to actually do damage because of the cool wombo combo, which means you only get 8 shots in total, and it does already terrible damage. So yeah, not very good. And then there's also some other bit more minor issues, like its destroying crystals capability is a bit low, mainly in the blast radius department. Sometimes if you trap an enemy in the bowling pins and you shoot at them, you just won't destroy some of the back pins, which is kind of annoying. And then on top of that, the charge time is way too high for this thing. It's not a fusion rifle, and it has 2 firing modes. It doesn't change at all. You either do the uncharged shot or the high shot. So why the hell does it have a 500-second charge time? That's just ridiculous. But yeah, other than that though, it is at least usable. And it's finally on its path of redemption to become maybe an actual good weapon. But yeah, no, we're not moving on. Next up, we have my ability to make a different video other than this fucking one. Seriously, for the past like 2 weeks, I've been working on this like straight. And honestly, I'm very tired of it. I'm bored of this. Not of the series, don't get me wrong, but this video in particular. God, I'm really bored of it. But yeah, actually talking about the video instead of my own complaints. We got some good changes this season, and a lot of armor changes. Some of them I wish were better, some of them were pretty goddamn good. Also, all of the weapon changes were really good. In fact, just all of the changes this season were really good. Maybe that's why this video is 40 fucking minutes long. But anyway, that's about it for me. I hope you enjoyed, and if you watched this far, how? Well done. Gold star of, you know, tolerance. But yeah, see ya.